in a quiet suburban neighborhood where every lawn seemed perfectly edged and every driveway neatly swept. One homeowner valued his property as a sanctuary. He had worked hard for his little corner of peace, tending to his yard with patience and care. The grass was lush and green, the flower beds meticulously arranged, and a small white fence framed the boundary lines. It was his pride, a reflection of years of effort and discipline. But there was a problem. His next-door neighbor, a woman who had long gained a reputation for entitlement, decided his yard was nothing more than a convenient shortcut. Instead of walking around the sidewalk like everyone else, she cut directly across his property, trampling his carefully trimmed lawn without so much as a glance. To her, it wasn't trespassing, it was simply easier. At first, he tried to ignore it. The footprints across the grass irritated him, but he hoped she would realize on her own how disrespectful it was. Yet days turned into weeks, and her boldness grew. She didn't just cross quietly. She strutted through, sometimes with grocery bags in hand, other times leading her small dog across the yard. Each time, the damage to the grass became worse. Brown patches formed where she repeatedly walked, and his once pristine lawn started to lose its charm. The situation gnawed at him. He had invested countless hours into maintaining his property, only to watch it be slowly disrespected. But more than the damage, it was her attitude that angered him. She behaved as though she had a right to use his yard whenever it suited her. She never asked permission, never apologized, never even acknowledged that it wasn't his to step on. One afternoon, he saw her pass again, and this time she was joined by a friend. They laughed as they strolled directly through his flower bed, crushing a few of the blossoms. That was the breaking point. It was no longer just about grass or flowers. It was about boundaries, about respect, and about standing up to someone who thought the world revolved around her convenience. That evening, he sat on his porch, staring at the worn path she had created across his lawn. He realized she would never stop on her own. He needed to take action, not with confrontation, but with something clever, something that would leave no doubt in her mind that his yard was off limits. He began to brainstorm. Ideas came and went, fences, signs, cameras, but none felt satisfying enough. Then, as he thought about how entitled she was, a spark of creativity struck him. He would set up something that would both protect his yard and ensure that the next time she trespassed, she would regret it. By the end of that week, he had a plan ready, and when the installation was complete, it looked harmless enough, almost unnoticeable to anyone not paying attention. But for the arrogant neighbor, it would deliver a lesson she would never forget. The trap was set, and all that remained was a wait for her next trespassing stroll. The plan had taken shape with quiet precision. The homeowner knew that direct confrontation with his entitled neighbor would only lead to endless arguments and denial. She was a kind of person who thrived on conflict, always ready to twist the story until she looked like the victim. So instead, he decided her arrogance would be her undoing, and all he had to do was prepare the stage. He started with small adjustments. Along the edge of the path she had carved into his lawn, he installed a series of discrete sprinkler heads, the kind that could be controlled with a timer. They weren't visible from the sidewalk, or even at a glance across the grass. They blended seamlessly into the yard, hidden until activated. But the key was in the programming. He set them to run at unusual intervals, not just in the morning or evening, but randomly throughout the day, specifically during the hours when she was most likely to cross. Next, he placed a few decorative garden features, small solar lights, a couple of low flower pots, and even a short trellis near the side of his property. To anyone else, they looked like harmless additions meant to beautify the lawn. But in truth, they created a subtle obstacle course. The walkway she had grown accustomed to was no longer a straight, easy route. Now, she would have to weave her way through, paying closer attention than she was used to. The final touch was the most ingenious. He laid down a harmless but slippery patch of biodegradable garden gel just beneath the grass where the soil was already soft from watering. Invisible to the naked eye, it wouldn't hurt anyone, but the moment someone stepped carelessly across that spot, they'd lose balance and end up with muddy shoes. Or worse. It was perfectly safe, but humiliating enough to make its point. The trap was now complete, and like a fisherman waiting for the catch, he simply observed from his porch in the evenings, pretending to relax with a drink in hand, while secretly watching for the inevitable. It didn't take long. On the third day after his setup, he heard the familiar sound of her voice outside, loud, confident, and dismissive as always. Sure enough, she stepped off the sidewalk and onto his lawn, a shortcut path as casual as if it belonged to her. This time, however, she wasn't alone. She had her dog tugging at the leash and a grocery bag swinging from her arm. Her focus wasn't on her feet or where she was stepping. It never was. As she walked across, her dog tugged forward, pulling her straight into the patch of wet soil. The sprinkler system activated at that very moment, releasing a sudden spray of water directly into her path. Caught completely off guard, she slipped, flailed, and fell hard onto the soggy grass. The grocery bag flew from her hand, spilling items into the mud. Her shriek of shock echoed down the street. The once perfect shortcut had turned into her stage of humiliation. Neighbors peeked through windows, and a few passing cars slowed as she scrambled awkwardly, dripping wet, trying to collect herself. What was once her arrogant stride was now a clumsy retreat. She stormed back to her home, soaked and furious, leaving behind a trail of muddy footprints. The homeowner, watching quietly from his porch, hid his satisfaction. His plan had worked exactly as intended. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to let something like this go. The incident had become the talk of the neighborhood within hours. Everyone had either seen it happen or heard the details retold with laughter and exaggeration. The proud neighbor who once marched across someone else's yard with her head high was now the subject of whispered jokes and knowing smirks. Her tumble through the sprinklers and mud had left her not only embarrassed, but exposed. Yet, true to her nature, she didn't admit fault. The next morning, a complaint was posted on the community forum. She ranted about dangerous traps and reckless behavior, insisting that her fall was a homeowner's fault. But her story didn't gain the sympathy she expected. Instead, neighbors began asking why she had been on his property at all. The more she tried to defend herself, the clearer it became that she had no excuse. One by one, the comments piled up. Some reminded her that trespassing was against the law. Others pointed out that if she had respected boundaries in the first place, nothing would have happened. Even the HOA, often quick to back up complaints, stayed silent. The truth was simple. She had humiliated herself, and now she had no ground to stand on. Meanwhile, the homeowner carried on as if nothing had happened. He watered his flowers, trimmed his hedges, and waved to neighbors who gave him knowing nods of approval. Without ever raising his voice or filing a formal complaint, he had turned the tables. His plan had worked, not through anger, but through patience and cleverness. The woman, however, had changed. She no longer cut across his yard. Instead, she walked the long way around, her steps sharper, her eyes cast forward to avoid making contact with him or anyone else who might smirk at her expense. The shortcut that once symbolized her arrogance now symbolized her downfall. The lush green grass slowly grew back, healing the scar of her repeated trespasses. Weeks later, when the memory of her fall had settled into neighborhood lore, he added a small finishing touch to his yard, a cheerful wooden sign staked near the edge of the grass. Painted in bright letters, it read, "Private property, please use the sidewalk." It was polite, almost humorous, and entirely unneeded now, but it stood as a reminder of what had transpired. Neighbors chuckled when they saw it, and some even stopped to take photos. To them, it wasn't just a sign, it was a trophy of his quiet victory. A victory that came not through confrontation, but through patience, planning, and a bit of poetic justice. In the end, the lesson was clear. Disrespecting boundaries always comes at a cost. The woman had believed she was untouchable, free to do as she pleased. But one slip, one soaking humiliation, had shattered that illusion forever. The yard remained his sanctuary, the grass vibrant once more, undisturbed by unwanted footsteps. And the story of the trespassing neighbor lived on, retold with laughter at barbecues and block parties, forever reminding everyone in the community what happens when arrogance meets consequence. The homeowner had taught her a lesson she would never forget. Do like subscribe for more video.